Great. So welcome everybody. Have the pleasure of introducing myself and my colleagues this time today. So I'm Stewart Desson, and it's Joy Maitland and Atiya Sheikh will be working together to share this talk around inclusivity. So the first part of the talk will be about what it is and how business psychology can help organizations work on their inclusivity. And then into the second sort of section is going to be about some case studies, and we'll hear some brilliant experiences from Joy and Atiya, both in this country and in Kenya. And we'll also share some information from some projects in Japan, all themed around inclusivity. And some of them have been award-winning, so that's pretty cool. And you'll have chances to ask questions about them. So I'm going to jump in and share some PowerPoints. So let's have a look. I'm hoping you can see my PowerPoints. Is that working? Do I get a thumbs up from somebody? Yep. Yeah, I'm getting nods. So yes, myself and Joy and Atiya this evening. What is inclusivity? What's the path to improving inclusivity? And then some award-winning case studies from around the globe. So actually, I'm going to start out by asking all of us on the call here today to use the chat box and just intuitively and quickly answer this question. What comes to mind when you hear the word inclusivity? What are the sort of connotations? What does it make you think? And we can just pop it into the box. So everybody's welcome. We're all welcome. Yeah. Maria, you're saying you want to feel safe, you belong, you can be yourself. Yeah. And Joy, you can see me. Yeah. We can see you and that we're valued. So yeah. Wide participation from Deji, so it means that everyone's included in participation, and respect from Deb as well. You'll see later that's one of the themes in one of the case studies. Inclusivity meant respect in this particular case. So we feel like we belong, we can bring our whole self to the party, and we're heard, and so on. Yeah, I concur with all of it, really. Let me ask you another question. What's the difference between equality and inclusivity? How do you think they might vary? And this time I'm going to ask you, I'm just going to stop sharing the screen and you can just unmute and unpack. So what's the difference between equality and inclusivity? If anybody wants to, if you're polite, you can raise your hand, or if not, you can just unmute and just share. What do you reckon the difference is? Equality versus inclusivity. Anyone got a hunch? I've been trained not to answer my own questions when I'm facilitating, so
Stewart, I'll go for it. I think equality is giving people equal opportunities to either achieve something or be something. It doesn't mean they're treated equally,
yeah,
but they have equal access. So that may be different for me, for you, but we can still achieve those things. I even though I'm afforded those opportunities, doesn't mean I feel included. So I could have the opportunities, right, but still not feel included or embraced by an organization or a group.
So there could be equal opportunities there, but you still don't feel included. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I have an example of that from the beginning of my career. I joined British Airways in 1985 when I had a full, healthy head of hair. And what was notable was it was definitely an equal opportunity sort of recruitment process to get good people in. But actually, somehow, at the end of it, all the people that went to public schools got all the great jobs in the US and the Caribbean and so on. And all the people that went to comprehensive schools or grammar schools ended up with the less sort of sexy jobs in the UK and so on. So it was sort of seemingly equal opportunity, but definitely not a sense of inclusivity when you got into it. That was a different era, of course. I'm hoping it's not like that now. but that speaks a bit, Louise, to what you were saying about it was sort of, there was some equity, but it wasn't so inclusive.
Stewart, I have an example, if
Yeah,
I may share.
please. Yeah.
In my previous life, I was responsible for a certain number of managers. And because I'm big picture thinking, inspiration driven sort of individual, I'd always be thinking about ways that we could improve our service, how we could do things better, how we could be stronger, faster, all of that sort of stuff. So every month we'd have a meeting and I'd have a new idea to present to my team of managers. And then once the idea was presented, I'd go around the table and I'd say, Ray, what do you think? You know, Atiya, what do you think? Deborah, Ollie, Louise, Deji, what do you think? And I'd give everybody an opportunity to speak. And I thought in so doing, I was being a great manager. Everybody had a, opportunity for input and all of that sort of thing. And then I had an aha moment when I realized that treating people equally is not the same as treating people fairly. Treating people equally is not the same as treating people fairly. What I was doing was treating people equally, but if I wanted to be fair to them, I would respect the fact that some of them need more time to consider what I had presented and to feed back at a later date. So I immediately changed my whole approach. I would either send stuff in advance of the meeting, or if the idea was floated in the meeting, I'd say to people, anybody who wants to input now, go for it. And then we'd take it offline, and then the rest can come back to me by next Wednesday. And I had a much more colorful experience, to use a Lumina term.
Yeah, and I guess that was speaking a bit to, you could say introversion, extroversion. You were initially favoring people like yourself, more extroverted, but you
exactly so, and they appreciated it, right?
Yeah,
they really appreciated it. I had a particular director, and when I had a good idea, which I thought was a good idea, I'd say to him, break it for me, and he loved nothing better than to pick at it.
Brilliant. Brilliant example, Joy, and thank you for sharing it. So
Marie has her hand up.
Oh, Marie, you're in. Yeah.
I just wanted to say equality is often something that to a certain extent you can legislate for and make rules for, right? So lots of countries have, not all countries, but lots of countries have lots of laws, and they might have it in their constitution even about equality and that you don't discriminate against gender and race and all of that. But you can't really legislate for being inclusive in quite the same way.
I couldn't agree more, Marie. And what I would add on top of that is, if you want to help organizations be inclusive, we can do the legislative policy bit, but you really need business psychology to look at the psychological bits as to how you change people's mindset, culture, and give them an experience that helps them want to be inclusive. That's my take on it. Yeah. Okay, so I'm guessing you've probably, in different guises, seen this imagery before, but it does speak to the point that we were just talking about, the difference between equality and inclusion. But the big thing really is, how do you move from the left-hand side to the right-hand side? It's definitely easier said than done. And maybe it's more obvious when it's physical attributes, like you can see on this slide here, but when it's psychological or even invisible attributes, as in the case of, neurodiversity and so on, including neurodiverse people, it potentially becomes harder to be inclusive. This is an interesting paper from 2018 that looked at diversity versus inclusivity and what it takes to be inclusive in a workplace. And actually, this slide is really just summarizing what I think a number have just said, really, that I think these things could be treated as interchangeable, and you can mandate for diversity and equity. But actually, there's voluntary actions that are required to be inclusive. You've got to really want to be inclusive, and that requires the psychology. And this paper looked at, work group inclusion. Do I feel included? And what's the distinction between everybody fitting in? So we're all included, but we're all wearing the same uniform and we're forced to fit in. That's not really inclusive either. versus being able to express our own identity in the workplace. That's also part of inclusivity. And of course, leadership has a huge impact on inclusivity. We want inclusive leaders that know how to value diversity, that know how to encourage and challenge different behaviors, and are enthused to do that authentically. The other aspect of this paper is it talks about inclusion practices. So it's a practice, it's something that you do, and the role of leadership in that. And the key thing is role modeling. We need leaders to role model being inclusive. That's the best way that people learn. And when we're not being inclusive, people learn that as well, unfortunately. So it's about attracting that talent pool, valuing it, challenging any discrimination, whether it's big or small, and going for the business benefit actually of diversity, and building it into things like performance management. And the final thing, which is the big one, which is all about the climate, which I think you were speaking to, Murray. If we want really to value diversity, we need an inclusive climate. If you don't have it, bless you, and bless you again. If you don't have it, it will be evident in terms of turnover. So if we do in fact create a diverse workforce, but we're not inclusive, there are real downsides to that. It will create even more friction and frustration. If I go to the bottom point here, there's been a recent paper on something called the double empathy problem, which I think is interesting, because the double empathy problem occurs when we have some difference. It may be an age difference, it may be a race difference, it may be a neurodiversity difference, whatever it might be. And in my dialogue with you, at the back of my mind, I have judgments on you. And because I have judgments on you, because you're in a different group to me, any differences of empathy, because we've got a different perspective, are exaggerated, because I'm judging the group that you're from as being not as good as my group. And those judgments mean I can't hear you, and any disagreements become worse. So this is it's a recent paper just from 2022 this year, and it sort of says we don't have a good mutual understanding, but we've got different backgrounds in some way. And I start to attribute the breakdown or disagreement to the group that you belong. In this case, it could be a minority group. And I'm actually framing the group you're in as an issue, as a deficit, as a problem. And I'm actually falsely attributing a fault, and it's breaking my empathy. Of course, there's an antidote to that, which is to show more empathy. The double empathy problem happens when we've got that deficit model. It happens when we sort of use that as a reason for not getting on with people, rather than trying to celebrate the fact that we're different. So if we have a look at one interesting example here, I don't know if you've seen this book recently, Jews Don't Count by David Baddiel, but it's I had an interesting experience recently where I was on an inclusivity course, and lots of aspects of inclusivity were explored. But when I brought up anti-Semitism, there was like in this particular group, there was a blind spot. It wasn't really, they didn't want to talk about that form of inclusivity. They wanted to talk about other aspects of inclusivity. So that's also quite interesting, how we can be inclusive in one area, but maybe not in another. So my view here is that this is when we have an us versus them, identifying with my in-group. That's when inclusivity is not working. We might think we're being inclusive, but if we're over-identifying with our own group and engaging in identity politics, that's when we're not benefiting from the sort of self-awareness that's needed to tackle the double empathy problem. We're just doubling down on advocating for one group. So this is a model that you might find helpful. It's one that we've used to talk about differences, because if we want to be inclusive, there are organizational dimensions that we could discriminate on. It could be we favor certain fields of work or certain seniority, or I remember in my younger days, a friend's dad was a big union person and he suffered discrimination because he was engaged in a trade union and that wasn't valued in the local community. So these are sort of contextual outside things. Then we get to things that are more nothing to do with your work, but where I'm from Manchester. That could be a source of not being included. You could look at personal habits. You know, do we all go drinking on a Friday night, which might exclude people with certain religious beliefs, something on our appearance and so on. When we get to this third one, we're looking at dimensions that are more internal, inherent to us as an individual, such as our age, or our neurodivergence, or our gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and so on. And then right in the middle, we've got the things that are truly invisible, which include our natural differences, our way of being, our personality. And some of the case studies that we'll share today have included individual differences as part of the program of looking at inclusivity. So, oh, it rotates as well, just for good measure. How about that? Yeah. Just so you can read some of it that's upside down at the bottom. So this can be helpful to sort of broaden people's thinking in terms of what we mean by inclusivity. It could be any of these particular dimensions. One of the model that's been used in some of the case studies we're going to share is a 4-stage model that says if we really want to be inclusive, we need to pay attention to the psychology and change people's mindsets. And that starts with self-knowledge, it starts with self-awareness. It's hard to be inclusive of others if I don't really know myself, and if I'm not aware of the fact I'm judging other people, I'll slip into that double empathy problem and not even know I'm doing it. So it starts with self-knowledge. Valuing diversity, in my book, valuing diversity is another way of saying inclusivity, because it's not just diversity, but it's me putting value on other people's diversity. So it's about valuing the other and seeing other people as helpfully different. And then we can have rapport, and at the top here we can co-create results together. So if we're really inclusive, and this speaks to the organizational benefit of inclusivity, is actually we'll co-create results together, we'll be more creative, work will be more enjoyable, and so on. So there's sort of business benefits to it as well. So I don't know if Joy or Atiya want to chip in anywhere along the way. You're welcome to comment on any of this. Yeah. Now, some of the biases that break inclusivity. Joy, you talked about the sort of introversion extroversion one. We're going to have a very quick experience of that now. So I'm going to show a word on the screen, and if you think it would be helpful at work, you're going to, maybe with the annotate button, if you can make the annotate work, you can click on annotate and click on the stamp button. And if you think being bashful is good at work, I want you to do a tick. If, on the other hand, you're not so sure and you think it's not so helpful at work, I want you to do a cross. Don't know if everyone can have a quick experiment on that now, on the word bashful. Is bashful a good thing? Or do you instinctively feel this is just an intuitive exercise, so it's not a live choice, but is it a good thing, do you think, to have at work? And I'm going to flick through quite quickly, and as you see the words, put a cross or a tick as you feel moved to do so. So we have a look at the next word. The next word is bold. Is it good to be bold at work? Do you think bold people get good feedback and get on well or not? And what about untalkative? Is it good to be untalkative at work? How would those people be judged? And what about withdrawn? Is it good to be withdrawn at work? I'm getting some more crosses coming through. Quiet. Is it good to be quiet at work? Of course, some of this depends. If I ask my software developers at Lumina, they might like quiet. So it depends on the context, I know. What about being timid? Is it good to be timid at work? I'm getting more crosses. How about being active? Is it good to be active in the workplace? Getting some nice green ticks are coming through. Being reserved. Is it good to be reserved? How would we find that at work? Getting a question mark in between. Yeah, very good. Depends. Inhibited. Is it good to be inhibited? Does that help you at work? Question mark, cross. Unrestrained. Is it good to be unrestrained? I quite like being unrestrained myself. But you are all thinking it's not a good thing. No. Energetic. Is it good to be energetic at work? There's a few more to go. Joe's liking it. Jane, yeah, great. What about unexcitable? Is that a word that conjures up positive or negative connotations at work? Jane says yes. Joe says no. Verbal. Is it good to be verbal? How would you assess that? Some ticks. Talkative. Is it good to be talkative at work? Question mark, cross. Another cross. Okay, so we like a more... Oh, Joe says yes. Joe wants to talk. Shy. Is it good to be shy at work? Getting a few red crosses coming through. Assertive. Do we want to be assertive? Yeah, generally, it's getting some green crosses. Vigorous. And then one more to go after this. Do we want to be vigorous at work? It's getting some green ones. And then finally, daring. Do we think it's good to be daring at work? Okay, we've got a risk-orientated group here. You like being daring. So I'm going to save that. So the really interesting thing here is that these are the words that describe introversion and extroversion, at least according to psychologist Goldberg, who found the best words in the English language statistically to measure introversion versus extroversion. And if I show you what happens when we animate it, you'll see a lot of the words that got more of the crosses were in the introverted category, and the nice positive green ticks were in the extroverted ones. So why is that? I'm going to suggest it's a bias. There's something in our culture, maybe certainly in the UK, US, and so on, that values extroversion more than introversion. But it's more than that. Statistically, in the language, if we just use stats to try and get a model that discriminates and creates two polarities, we tend to get more positive words at the extroverted end than the introverted end. And that's a bias that can be in our psychometrics. I did a bit of research on this in my PhD, and I asked people to score these extroverted words 1 to 5 as to how good they are at work, and the introverted ones. And you can see there was quite a big difference between the two. So what you came up with was sort of similar. And the SPARK model, which we use in our inclusivity interventions, goes to great lengths to balance these two polarities, because actually, if we're doing inclusivity interventions, we want inclusive psychometrics that don't judge one end more than the other. So have a look at these words here. And if you can see a word that you think, you know, that's a strength that I have, I want you just to clock it in your mind. And if you can see one that you tend to avoid, so I like to be imaginative, but I probably avoid being cautious. I want you to do that just quickly and instinctively now. And I'm going to color code them, because the ones that are the same color sort of cluster together. And if we sort of animate it, the clusters actually fit in a circular model. So we can look at our individual differences, and we can see on the right, we've got extroversion, on the left, we've got introversion, but there are other aspects of the Big Five model shown all around here. Some of us are naturally more spontaneous. Some of us like good ideas. Some of us like joy, are more extroverted. And some of us like to focus on outcomes and be direct, but they've all got opposites. And we tend to, if we're not self-aware, prefer our own ones and judge negatively the opposites. If I'm all inspired, I see discipline-driven people as a bit boring, but actually they might see me as chaotic. Actually, they both have a value. And if we're going to be inclusive, we need to value all these differences. The opposite of big picture is sensible, down to earth. Obviously, we've covered introversion, extroversion. And then there's being people-focused, empathetic, which is the opposite of the candid outcome focus. So I'm interested to know if you've got a strength that you think helps you. I'm going to make the assumption that you're on this call because at one level, you're a champion of inclusivity, that we want it. So I'm going to ask you now to use the stamp facility again. This time you can use a heart if you like. And what is it that you use in your personality to help you champion inclusivity? I'm going to give myself a little mark on the radical, because I like to push it and challenging. I can see we've got sociability, imagination, collaboration. A few more things coming through. Another one on radical. Thank you for joining me there, Murray. Yeah. So our individual differences can help us promote inclusivity, but they can also, unfortunately, but realistically, get in the way as well. So if I have a look here, those of you that are people focused, it's possible you could get too much into consensus and sometimes back down from challenging when you need to challenge. Or maybe Marie can get into change for the sake of change. And that could limit my ability, could hinder my ability to promote inclusivity. So have a look on the screen, and you might want to add another stamp if you think there's a word that you think you sometimes do. So I'd probably say that I can sometimes be argumentative down here. And when I'm being argumentative, maybe that's not so, it's not helping create an atmosphere of inclusivity, for example. And these are some of the exercises that the case studies indeed have used to help people explore their approach to inclusivity. So I'm hoping you found that sort of orientation to a little bit of the psychology behind it helpful. And I'm going to pass to Joy. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so Joy and Atiya can pick up here and share how you've used some of these ideas in some of your awesome award-winning case studies. So over to you guys.
Well, thank you very much, Stewart. Very interesting so far. I'm really enjoying this presentation. Well, I'm pleased to be here today too. And I'm really excited to share the work we've been doing with young people pre and during and post-pandemic. Many of you may have heard of our program, but if you don't know, many of the young people we coach are minority ethnic young men and women who live in socially immobile and underserved communities. And they come from areas often described as marginalized backgrounds. Yeah? And our Leveling Up program's been running since 2014, and it really happened by sheer accident. And Atiya and I ongoing, I mean, we give a lot and we get so much more in return. So it's always an honor to support these individuals. So I think what I want to share today is some of our thinking behind our approach. When I reflect on what many of our young people are up against today, and you will know what I'm talking about, I believe that in many ways their lives are full of unnecessary complications. I mean, take, for example, for me, I remember when I got my job with Royal Bank, I went in, I sent in my CV, went in, had a wonderful chat with the personnel manager. Next thing you know, I got the job. Now they have to jump through so many hoops, so many different levels, so many assessments in order to land that job. So the rules of navigating today's society are incredibly complex. And that's written and unwritten rules. So I think the biggest thing we do for our coaches is what we call helping them become top-notch pilots. Why do I say that? I say that because it's all about being excellent navigators. If you think about it, they need to be great communicators. They need to work out the best route to take and how to use the available data to get them where they want to go. They need to know how high they're going to fly. They need to be prepared for adverse conditions. And importantly, they need to be resilient. So understanding how to navigate all of these complexities is exactly the work we do with our coaches. And I'm just going to pause to share this presentation with you. Did I output to sound is my question.
Definitely make sure you do that because you've got some awesome
videos.
Yeah.
It hasn't shared.
It hasn't shared?
No.
Okay.
Not
You need to go to Zoom.
Yeah, it's because I haven't properly shared my screen. Okay, got it. Here we go. We're cooking. Okay. So I first want to start with one of our coaches, and he has shared his thoughts. He's shared with us his thoughts on the pandemic, and he reflects on how he sees things going forward. And this is Xavier Hamilton. So let me introduce one of our coaches to you, Xavier Hamilton.
What the pandemic has done, it has got us to reimagine the whole world. Well, we've been forced to see the whole world very differently.
Sorry, we have this black mark against the screen, right? We've got that slide.
What this time has taught, and part of the reimagining process, is about leadership and what leadership really means. We've seen in the world, from a world stage, we've seen as leaders rise and fall, especially in the UK. And I think it's a part of the culture that we've developed in the world where we cancel everyone for their mistakes. As soon as you do something wrong, you're cancelled. And the problem is, I love that scripture in the Bible that says, let him who's without sin cast the first stone. Because the reality is, as soon as someone casts a stone and cancels someone, by the time they get in that position next week, they're going to be cancelled anyway, because we've become less and less tolerant of each other and mistakes and people's journeys in life, and we're looking for perfection, which cannot be attained. I think the pandemic has given people the time to stop from the rat race, step out and really think about, what do I want to do? How do I want to see myself in 20, 30, 40, 50 years time? How am I setting myself for the next generation on my...
So that was
What the pandemic...
Xavier. Now, I saw this research by Young Minds Org, and I found it incredibly interesting. Survey conducted in January to February 2021, young people aged 13 to 25. And the stat that I found most interesting was this: 67% of these young people believed that the pandemic will have a long-term negative effect on their mental health. 67% of our young people. So what this says to me is that we are going to need, all of us around here and everybody else, to look out for each other, and especially our young people. I mentioned looking out for each other because in my coaching practice, I have found a lot of my clients beginning to report feelings of PTSD, mainly because throughout the pandemic, they were busy propping up others or supporting others or caring for others. So it might be an elderly parent, or it might be a young child or something like that. So now that the pandemic is more or less in our past, I know we still have issues today, they're entering a period where they feel rather lost and slightly depressed and that sort of thing. So we're talking about adults here now, mature adults in roles where they have a lot of responsibility, talking about feelings of PTSD. So I think this is something we're going to continue to face going forward, and we need to throw everything we can at it to help each other solve these problems. Here's another stat from another survey. It was published this year, really, February 2022, by Place to Be and the National Association of Head Teachers. So when we look at mental health problems among pupils, they saw significant increases in low self-esteem, depression, and constant feelings of anger. Now, for me, I understand the first two and the impact that could have on an individual. But the third one, constant feeling of anger, is something we really need to unpick. And Stewart, I don't know if you have something to offer in this area. I suspect you do.
Well, for me, if people are feeling anger, it normally means that something's triggered them. And in my terminology, that's that wheel I showed you earlier with the overextensions. It means you're living in a place that's not comfortable and you're not bringing out the best of who you are. And I guess, yes, I think there are business psychology has got a lot to offer in helping people notice when this is happening and getting back to being more composed, although it's not easy. Yeah,
indeed. Thanks, Stewart. Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if anyone else has any comments to make on this particular slide. What's been your experience?
Joy, this is Deb.
Hi, Deb.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Taking me back, when I go back to my days of when I was a teacher in a secondary school and the head of year, often, and there was so many reasons for anger, but sometimes it was a lack of being in any sort of control and of your life being completely taken out of your hands and struggling to make any sense of it. And and particularly when I think about the last couple of years with the pandemic, I think some of the young people have had a really terrible time, a very unsettling time for them. And I don't think it's going to go away for quite a while for them.
Yeah, for quite a while. And I'm not sure that the powers that be recognize it in the way that they should. So we have a lot of work to do as psychologists, I imagine. Okay, thank you very much for that. Moving on then, I wanted to really talk a little bit more about the Leveling Up program that I introduced you to earlier. I think the reason why it's been incredibly successful, I mean, we've been working with quite a number of individuals now over the years, 24 with others who've come in and out since 2014. And our Leveling Up program, as it says here, it's a personal psychological experience grounded in our coaches' lived experience. So we're talking about the absolute what's happening for you. How is it for you? You know, one moment we could be talking to a coachee and helping them ace an interview, and another minute we could be talking to them and role-playing a critical conversation they need to have with a parent or a teacher, or indeed even a manager, and how they navigate all of that. That navigating thing comes back in again. So it's all about what's happening for them, what they need at that time, and ensuring that they get what they need. So it's very intensive, and it's more personal one-to-one. When we look at this statement, meritocratic education discourse continues to present schools as engines of social mobility. And that's regardless of their individual circumstances. So we have to question, though, can schools really make up for the significant structural disadvantages of students with certain backgrounds? So we're talking about they may be poor or marginalized in some way. We would suggest not. In the UK and US, punishments like suspension and expulsion disproportionately affect Black students. In the UK, for example, and I know Deb will know about this, we have such things called pupil referral units, PRUs for short. And really, students go there where students who have challenges, they go there and hope that they will rehabilitate, as it were, and then re-enter mainstream education. However, the stigma attached to it is enormous, and it follows them throughout their lives. And yes, disproportionately, we have young Black boys and girls who are entering PRUs than any other ethnicity, if you could call Black an ethnicity, but you know what I mean. So imagine that's kind of setting them up for failure from the start, right? So again, it's something that we really need to pay close attention to and to address. And the stigma attached to it, as I said, follows them throughout their lives. They go into these PRUs and oftentimes they give up. They say, well, why do I bother? Because I've already been labeled, so why do I bother? Why should I bother, rather? Now, here we're moving into the workplace, and we know that 13% of the UK's working population represents minority groups. We also know that we continue to hear that young people of the ethnic minority are absent from the top levels of the professions within businesses. And a lot of companies have been over the years working to change that. Well, so they say. They've been working to change it. And I have to believe that things are improving, but at such a slow pace. We learn that at the current rate of change, the leadership of the UK's top listed firms will not be representative of the UK's ethnic diversity for another 216 years. 216 years, imagine that. So that 13% is not going to be reflected for some time. Means that we need to accelerate what we're doing and see what and find other solutions. When we move through to bias, conscious and unconscious bias, we know that just those terms, they can have a debilitating effect on the futures of individuals. Because, for example, a young person who is of a certain ethnicity and cultural differences alone may be reflected in the way that they behave, will be reflected in the way that they behave, and they could be judged for that particular behavior, not understanding that this might be a cultural difference. And of course, when we talk about our coaches, and we're going to hear from a couple of them in a minute, we know, for example, there's a saying that if you're Black, you need to work twice as hard to achieve the same as your peers who are not of the same ethnicity or are not an ethnic minority, rather. So let's hear from George and Victor.
I was told twice as hard within the household, outside of the household. The sentiment was there. It's not necessarily to do it all the time, but just like, you know, as, you know, a Black young person trying to secure opportunities and, you know, get to the next step, that I would often have to work twice as hard. I didn't necessarily see it as motivating, but there needs to be a way of telling the reality without always speaking about just, you know, racism and institutional racism or otherwise. And I felt like that was kind of what I understood from the statement of working twice as hard, is that you're not going to be seen as, they don't value you nearly as much as they value, you know, your white counterparts, for example. To some ways, a fact, but it's not motivating. I accepted it and very much internalized it maybe in some way, because I knew that I was going up against a lot of resistance and I was just now aware of it. So I wasn't drinking the Kool-Aid. I knew that if they had a chance to pick me at an interview and someone else that had equal amount of qualifications, equal amount of energy, integrity, it's going to be an interesting one, and they're probably going to choose the other person just because that person is more palatable. So I would have to do a little bit more in order to stand out.
Using the term twice as hard is a motivational response to that idea that the game is rigged. Because when you say you need to work twice as hard to get, or you need to work 3 times as hard to get what a particular group has, you're basically saying the game is rigged. But it's a way in which you provide this motivated sense that, okay, we've accepted that the game is rigged in favor of certain people, but in order for you to get further, you need to do X, Y, Z, and you need to work at much more kind of like velocity than someone else. With it comes potentially an assessment of inferiority. Is why do I have to work twice as hard when they don't have to work twice as hard? Is it that they're better than me naturally? And there's certain questions that come like that. And I think that inferiority in some ways is compounded by where you grow up, by sometimes your family structure. If you have are both parents present, your economic status, were you on free school meals, did you grow up in low income housing, and how that even low income housing even has physical effects, right? Asthma, hypertension, all of these things that can potentially come into play. So I don't think it's a helpful term. I understand why it was said. I think there was a level of, look, this is the cards we've been dealt. It's your job to make sure that you can make something of it.
So if you mute. Okay, so if we look at the, sorry, there's a little bit of feedback. So if we look at the actual program itself, and we focus on how our coachees overcame these hindrances or obstacles, it really centers around 5 different things. And what really connects all of these 5 different things is one word, essentially, relationships. It's all about the quality of the relationship. So their relationships with their parents and their parental influence, their understanding of their cultural identity. So it's a critical piece of their personal identity and worldview. Their relationship with their teachers and how influenced they've been by their teachers, their experience within the workplace environment with their direct line managers and organization-wide as well. And of course, in terms of the coaching and mentoring relationship with us. So this was a really key theme around all of these 5 things. So how did we approach the Leveling Up program? So first of all, we started with a unique personalized coaching contract, and no 2 coaching contracts were the same because as you can appreciate, with each of the young people that we worked with, they had their own individual set of needs and often quite complex set of needs. And so we really kind of tailored the contract to reflect that. We started off with weekly report, and as they built up confidence and self-efficacy, we were able to sort of prolong the period between contact to say fortnightly and then monthly, and beyond that to as and when the support was required. And most importantly of all, it was really important to help them build that ownership piece and to build accountability, was to set personalized goals that they would work towards achieving. And again, that in turn helped to build that confidence and that belief in their capability. So essentially, we became, and we have become, for those that we are continuing to coach, their accountability partner. So our experience tells us that good quality learning must be grounded in experience, and that's where we start. So having the actual experience, and then reflecting on the experience, learning from the experience, and then of course, finally trying out what you have learned. And, you know, we work with our coaches on a number of different aspects and areas. For example, we often help them with preparing for interviews. So when a student has actually attended the interview, pretty much immediately after the interview, or very soon after, we'll have a call with them for them to share how the interview went. So to essentially debrief us on the interview, to tell us what worked well and what didn't, and their feelings about it. And regardless of whether the interview was successful or not, or if they secured the job or not, we always encourage them to learn from that experience and to take away, you know, something that they could improve on or apply on in their next interview. We use a number of different tools, including the coaching that we've talked about, and our coaching methods are adapted from CBT. So CBT helps our coachees to address their self-limiting beliefs. Now, essentially, CBT connects negative thoughts, unhelpful behavior, and upset feelings. So the concept is that your thoughts, your feelings, and your behaviors are all interconnected. And that, of course, these negative thoughts and feelings can be unhelpful, can trap you in a vicious cycle. And essentially what we do in adapting our coaching from CBT is to help them break down some of these problems that can seem quite overwhelming at the time, and break them down and kind of reframe them in a more positive way. And of course, you know, we've mentioned Lumina, Stewart's mentioned Lumina Spark earlier on in the conversation. A key part of the Leveling Up program includes our coachees experiencing Lumina Spark. You know, it's a highly interactive experience, and we support coachees in exploring who they are through their individualized psychometric profile, so their Lumina Spark portrait. So we focus on inclusivity, valuing diversity, self-esteem, how to navigate complex relationships, and we look at derailers as well. So as I mentioned before, every engagement that we undertake with the coachee starts with Lumina Spark. They learn about their core psychological preferences, so the qualities that Stewart showed you earlier on the mandala that you can see on screen here, the qualities that make them who they are. We also look at how they use their qualities in their everyday relationships, so they learn about that. And they also learn about how they might overplay some of these qualities, and we call those their overextensions. And of course, we also look to explore any hidden treasures or opportunities for growth and improvement. So it really is a real journey of discovery for them through this process. Now, another one of the tools that we use is the Sedona method. So it's a really unique, powerful way to uncover your natural ability to let go of any kind of painful or unwanted feelings in the moment. So it's a really easy to learn technique that can be repeated, you know, as and when those feelings come up. And through the Sedona method, we're exploring their psychological needs for approval, control, security, separation, oneness. So usually the painful or unwanted feeling is linked to one of those 5 wants. So how did we measure success? So when we asked for an overall rating for the INEMO Leveling Up Coaching and Mentoring Program, 23 out of the 24 that we interviewed scored 5 out of 5 excellent, and 1 scored 4 out of 5 very good. And then at least 6 months into the program, when we asked them about their retained knowledge of their strengths, possible derailers, and how to better relate to others, we had 19 who scored strongly agree and 5 who scored agreed. And we also had the coachees assessing the impact and practical application of what they'd learned. So the impact of the program on their career and life goals was articulated in the coachees' own words. And I think that we have that on the next screen or the screen after. And I know that we're going to be sharing these slides with you after the session, or the ABP will be sharing them. But it was just to quickly point out to you the 4 areas that we looked into. So we looked at achieving results, emotional intelligence, stability and longevity, and processing self-talk. And so we've grouped the results under those 4 headings. And just similarly here, just a few testimonials, which again we'll be sharing with the rest of the slide deck. But let's hear from George and Victor on how coaching has helped them.
Practice is permanent, as Joy would always say. So that's one of the things that I always take into account. I just take into account the fact that I need to work diligently at it. And the weird thing, or the magical thing about it, I should say, is the fact that when you do practice, when you do make it permanent, you become more self-confident in your skills and your abilities. And then that manifests itself in other places where you kind of adopt this growth mindset, as you said earlier. And it's like, there's nothing that if I put myself to, I'm not able to learn. It might take longer. It might not necessarily happen tomorrow, but if I apply myself, I can potentially pick up the key principles that will help me learn. And I think coaching is very, very important for that, because I think if I was left to my own devices at that age, I would have the enthusiasm, but I wouldn't necessarily have the understanding, or I wouldn't have been able to kind of know where to go for the information. I wouldn't have known shortcuts. I wouldn't have been provided with potentially, and no shortcuts in the sense of like dodging things, but more so just understanding how to get there quicker, how to get there more efficiently. And I think that matters a lot of the time when you do have a lot of energy to expend.
So for me, it very much started off with an assessment of myself and what I was good at and maybe not so good at. So the strengths and the weaknesses through Lumina Spark, which was the psychometric tool being used at the time. And just through having that and then setting SMART goals with the coaches, I could now take the environment that I was in and completely start dreaming again, because there was a lot of limitations growing up in Peckham. But now I kind of looked at, okay, cool, this is what I do have, and this is what might be not so good. So I might not be as an effective communicator just yet. I might not have the language, I might not be as succinct, I might not be as empathetic, and all of these things, and understanding, okay, so now what are the goals that I need to do or like set in order to actually achieve some of these things and level up in the area of just myself, being more confident and actually getting the skills. And I feel like coaching allowed me to become aware of that, be aware of my gaps, my blind spots that just no one told me before, no one could help me with. And I think it was very empowering, because I realized that I had it all within me and I just needed someone to essentially help me bring that out.
And there we have it. We'll let George and Victor have the last word. And back to you, Dr. Desson.
Joy and Atiya, just to acknowledge you though, to have impacted those young people in such a profound way, it really moves me every time I hear them speak. Yeah, so awesome impact through essentially coaching and mentoring. Yeah, and Joy, those were the 24 people that went the distance, but you impacted many, many more over the years.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. For sure.
Ones that were the ongoing experience, but lots of people touched for a shorter number of sessions. So yeah, thank you.
It really all is about, for me, I speak for myself, it's about being the difference and making a difference, a positive difference in the lives of others and my life as well, I suppose.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure we all share.
Yeah, I think that's why many of us are drawn to do this sort of work, aren't we? So, well, I have got a couple of other case studies I wanted to share. And the next one is some work with the United Nations in Kenya, which actually Joy and Atiya were involved in and supporting directly as well. So Joy and Atiya, I'll lead on it, but please do chip in as we go. So let me just come back here and share my screen. So this was a collaboration with Joy and Atiya and oh, sorry, the wrong one. Let me get back to here. This is the one I wanted. It's a collaboration between Joy and Atiya and Lantern Training with Lucy Brewster and her team out in Kenya. It was also an inclusivity program that largely focused on the concept of respect. So in this particular program, it was about distributing food, and it was about the culture of the people distributing the food throughout the country, including to multiple refugee camps. Lumina Spark was used in a similar way, actually, to how Joy and Atiya have outlined the previous coaching and mentoring program. And the focus in this case was around having a more in-depth discussion around what they call deep diversity. And one of the techniques that was used was something called World Cafe, which for those of you that haven't experienced it, it's a very organic way of getting a large group to cluster around tables set up literally like a cafe to discuss things, and then in a structured way moving on to discuss interesting and other questions at different tables, and then in a sort of huge facilitated process to draw out the learnings together. So those were some of the techniques that we used, and this is geographically across the whole of Kenya. This is one of the facilitation teams, and that's Lucy in the middle there. And the challenge that initiated this program was essentially a huge staff engagement survey, which highlighted where things need to be improved and produced a big strategic plan to make things better. Initially, the main focus was awareness, and the Lantern team, working with the UN, came up with adding in inclusion, fairness, and humanity as further objectives for the program. So it was about changing the mindset. Again, a lot of focus on the concept of respect, helping people understand their preferred ways of working and valuing others. There was a lot around accountability in here as well. Also looking at what we do under pressure. So this particular project ran over the COVID period when there were lockdowns and geographical limitations, but also huge amounts of stress during this process as well, including within the team some tribal differences given people's different backgrounds. So how you overextend, how you get triggered, and how you get back to being respectful were important parts of it. And it was about appreciating diversity within the team. And here are just some nice pictures of some of the interventions. So it went on for over 3 years, face-to-face workshops, some of it remote during the COVID crisis. It included coaching as well. And these are just some of the numbers that came through. They're just a taster of the numbers, but another staff engagement survey was done, and there were some, definitely substantial and worthwhile improvements in line manager effectiveness, communication, belonging, diversity and inclusion, and so on.
Sorry, Stuart, could I add?
Yeah, please do.
A couple of things. Sorry.
You're echoing, but I think we're getting the gist. Yeah.
Okay, I've just muted. Yeah, so essentially, one of the things that kind of drove this program or underpinned this program with WFP is that they wanted to create some sort of lasting change within the community by first, going through that transformation within the organization, and then the individuals within the organization being able to then take that to their communities, because in having their lives transformed professionally, it would then hopefully, kind of filter out into their personal lives and into the work that they did out in the community. And in fact, this is now hopefully extending to WFP Somalia, where they're looking to encourage more women into the workplace, because a very small proportion of women in Somalia actually work, and there's kind of huge kind of cultural and tribal obstacles to overcome. But again, WFP is seeking to create that transformation within the community by first transforming the organization in the WFP in Somalia. So I think they're really, coming at it in a different way, but hopefully just as impactful and powerful. Yeah.
And Joy, Atiya, thank you for sharing that. The work is sort of ongoing, isn't it? So,
yes, correct.
And it's sort of expanding geographically and scope wise,
yes.
which is fantastic. Yeah. Thank you. So, are there any questions on that before I move on to the final case study I wanted to share, which is based on women in leadership work in Japan? Yeah. In which case I'll share something of this, and of course Marae is on the call. Please do chip in, Marae, as you feel fit. Yeah. So this is a leadership program focused on women, and actually it's based on 2 different organizations, a global insurance company and an international hotel chain, and was actually part of the drive was the Japanese government recognizing the need to have more women in leadership positions, and focusing on development. And in this particular program, as with the ones join Atiya have shared, Spark was part of it, personality, self-awareness, but it also included a leadership application with an assessment of leadership with 360 and feedback and coaching around that. And this is the call to action from the Japanese government. And it's all about, you know, the world's changing rapidly. The economy needs more empowered and thriving female talent with confidence in strengths, communications, and leadership skills. So in essence, this is a response to that, that call. And just a few things to say briefly about it. Of course, as with many of these applications, self-awareness is at the heart of it. And it was a program that was helping women find their own authentic leadership style, looking again at self-doubts, a little bit of that CBT style approach to look at how you get rid of those doubts and focus more on presence, personal branding, and ultimately leading to action plans, goals, commitments supported by coaching. So that's the scope of these programs. Some of the results were around the authenticity, the sort of growth of the leaders on the program, more confidence, going back into organizations more aligned with an enhanced ability to form relationships, more ability to focus on strengths. So there was a strengths focus on this. And the final bit was about the ability to tune up and down. So part of it was knowing who I am. Can I better read the people I'm working with and dial up and dial down different behaviors or different bits of my personality to get better results? I'll just let you read this. So these are some of the words from the participants on the program, which were, you know, well, incredibly encouraging. And, you know, as I read them, I always find them uplifting. So that's really what I wanted to say, just to give you a feel for that, to give you the idea of the scope of diversity, including many different aspects. So we have covered what inclusivity is, a path to it, and we've looked at some award-winning and awesome case studies. So the formal bit is drawing to a close, and there's opportunity now for any comments or questions that anybody may have before we complete. So is there anything you want to ask anybody on the call, or share or say, that just needs to be said? And we do have some ongoing research around inclusivity, so I will add that if any of you want to complete some questionnaires around neurodiversity or gender and your experience of leadership in organizations, in a moment I'm going to round off by sharing with you a QR code that you might want to scan. Yeah,
we have one hand up, Stewart.
Oh, thank you. Great.
Or even two, I think.
Yes, go for it. You're on. I'm
So,
sorry, I missed it.
Hi, I have one question because I don't know, maybe I missed that, but was only Lumina Spark used, or you used also Lumina Select or any other tools?
Well, my experience of this was Lumina Spark was like the central entry point, and in Lumina Leader has been used certainly in the Japanese programs. I think Lumina Team has also been used to look at the dynamic of teams and how they work together as well. Join Atiya, did we use any others? I think in some other ones.
Lumina Emotion.
Yeah. Do you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, we did add Lumina Emotion because when you do that deep type of work, we found that Lumina Emotion really does bring to the surface a lot of the issues that you know, it's all about what lies beneath, right?
That was also I wondering if you use Lumina Emotion as well as the Spark. Thank you.
Yeah, it was incredibly powerful, but that happens later on once you develop that trust and everything with the coachee.
Yeah. Joy, I still remember you inviting me into London, this is a number of years ago, and saying, we want you to do Lumina Emotion with 50 young people in London. Yeah. And me feeling in truth slightly daunted, but it was a great experience. So
indeed, for them too.
Yeah. Thank you. Really, really great question. Yeah. Mairead, your hand is raised as well. What would you like to share? Yeah.
Sorry, just multitasking here.
Yeah.
Well, I just had a thought, just thinking about and kind of seeing back our women leadership program and thinking about the idea that a lot of the focus of that program is enabling women to step up, and that idea, you know, Sheryl Sandberg and Lean In and that kind of thing, right? Women taking up their place with confidence. And of course, the other side of that puzzle is the organization has to find ways to then be inclusive and appreciative of those women and their skills and their stepping up. But I realized that that echoes the conversation we were just having a couple of days ago around LGBTQ inclusion and something we've, you know, the contentious point that has come up around how much you expect people to make themselves visible in order to be included. And this idea of like that it takes two to tango. And I just kind of spotted the similarity in that. And I just wondered what anyone else thinks about where that kind of balance and that responsibility lies in inclusion between stepping up to be included and including.
I can offer one thing. I don't know if this really aligns with what you, or if this is the direction of travel for you, Mairead, but I was coaching someone a few days ago, and she mentioned that, you know, she's in one of these big firms, and we're talking about women in leadership here. And there was this particular woman who she described as displaying manly characteristics, as though she had changed in order to fit in to the top tier, right? So I challenged her with it, and I said to her, do you think that she's changed, or this is her? Because the assumption is that she's changed in order to fit in. The challenge I set her is to go and get to know this individual and understand them before the judgment happens. You know, because they're all on the road to partner, and she's assuming that this person is changing in order, as a woman, actually changing physically in order to achieve what she wants to achieve. So that was the task. And they were, you know, this group of women were making her feel a bit more isolated, really. I don't know.
I mean, Mairead, my take on your question would be, I would like it ideally that we can all be open and authentic and express who we are. That would be my aspiration. But we also need to be realistic in some of the organizations we work in. Maybe everybody being completely open, say, about their sexuality and identity is not, or even their neurodivergent status is not necessarily always a good idea if the culture isn't right for that. So I think as leaders, our job is to make the environment right so people would want to be open, but not necessarily expect everybody to be so. That's my take. And yeah.
That's what I also thought, that if you create a culture where if a person does want to give information about themselves, they feel that they can. And if they feel that they don't choose to give information about themselves, that is also okay, but not out of fear for how they might be judged.
But also I thought that idea about you have to work twice as hard that those young men were talking about in the video is kind of the same concept, right? They're saying, okay, the game is rigged. Maybe the organizations are not going to be bending over backwards to be inclusive towards them, and therefore they're taking on the responsibility themselves to some degree to make sure that they step up and are included. But obviously, you know, there's only so much they can do from their point of view, and some would probably argue that that wasn't their responsibility to do, and that the organization, you know, that the culture and the organizations and the society shouldn't expect them to have to work twice as hard to be included. So I don't know, it's just an interesting question around how that balance works out.
What I observed in joining Atiya in that coaching there was the working twice as hard, I think, came from the teachers and their upbringing, and part of the coaching, I think, was them shedding that sort of false belief that was meant to motivate but could also be limiting. Well, that's what I observed from where I was sitting during it here. I don't know if that's
yeah, I would say that you're absolutely correct. It is about shedding that, because what that leads to is that self-sabotage, where you get to the stage and you know, the imposter syndrome comes in, and all of a sudden you start to think, oh, I'm not deserving, and self-sabotage is a natural progression from that. So if it's not caught early, and if we don't do the work that required, as you said, to shed that, that's inevitably what would end up happening.
And Joy and Atiya, what I liked about the work you did was that you took people to that level of depth where they could look at what was sabotaging them, and you helped them overcome it. You know,
indeed, indeed.
That's depth.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I do question whether everybody's ready for everybody to be who they are.
Well, I saw in your assessment that you didn't go all out with everybody. It depended on how far the coaches wanted to go, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Everything in its time and not before.
He's done the initial.
I'm sorry, Joy. Could you say that again?
I said everything in its time and not before.
Indeed. Perfect. Yeah.
And I love the way, I think it was George was saying that he hopes one day to have the words and to be able to speak. And he was speaking so articulately and saying that's where he wanted to go. And I was thinking, wow, you're doing a very good job of it right now.
Yeah.
Well, George was on stage in Abu Dhabi recently speaking to the Prince and whoever else.
Yeah, no, Joy, amazing work you've done with him. Yeah.
And his team has just become, you know, world champions, the X44 Extreme team. Anyway, Deji has a question as well.
Yes, yeah, it's a comment really, and yeah, I think for George, he's saying what he has come into, from my perspective, is an awareness of what could stop him, and he's got that conscious awareness. But I'm wondering if it's that he's shared the work twice as much as the fact that he's taken it and made it serve him. You know, so and Joy, what do you think? I think it's that I don't think he's moved away from that concept. I don't think it's that he said, I'm not using this. It's that, okay, this is some kind of reality, but I can make it work for me. And it looks like that's what he's doing. What do you think, Joy?
Well, as he said in his video, he accepted it, but it's not something that we encourage them to dwell on, because, you know, he has a lot to contribute. So it's about really ensuring that there's an appreciation and a value, you know, valuing self overcomes anything else from this idea of working twice as hard and all of that. He works hard, but I don't think he sets out to work twice as hard, if you understand what I'm saying. He knows he has to work hard and put in the work. That's somewhere in the back of his mind, of course, but it's not going to be the key thing.
Really, really great question, and thanks for your response, Joy. Is there anything else anybody wants to ask or is curious about or wants to say? Now's a good time. Or we can draw to a close. If we are going to draw to a close, I am just going to suggest, if you are so motivated, I have 2 QR codes. So the one on the left, you can subscribe to a list that will send you some resources, tips, papers, including a paper on neurodiversity and one on women in leadership and so on. And the QR code on the right, if you want to take part in some inclusivity research, it'll ask you questions around gender and sexuality, but also questions about neurodiversity and your experience of the workplace and assessment. And if you do that one, you get a complimentary Lumina Spark and Lumina Emotion portraits as part of it as well. So I'll leave those there. If anybody feels like scanning them, you're welcome to do so. And I think join Atiya and also Maria as well. I think we're drawing today's session to a close. So I'm going to thank everybody for their time, and particularly those that wanted to watch England-Wales but have chosen to be here instead. And yeah, thank you for everything, for making it such a great session. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.
Have a great rest of the
so
week,
much.
everybody. Yeah, take care.
Come on, England.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.